All right, Shabbos, say good morning, good morning. Alichtig Gezos Chanukah. Let us begin by thanking all of our sponsors. To thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Teves. To thank the Daf Yomi Shir for dedicating the Shurim this month in memory of Mr. Milton Martyr, Mordechai David ben Rafal HaKohen, the schools of our Talmud Torah's Neshama having Aliyah, and the family a Nechama. To thank Shirley Elbaum and family for dedicating the Shurim this month in commemoration of the yard site of Jerry Elbaum, Yaakov couple, Ben Rav Avram Menachem. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, the Neshama will have an Aliyah, the family in Nechama. To thank our Daf Yomi sponsor for today, Avigail Alpern, for dedicating the sheer memory of her daughter, Rachel Alpern, Zichron Livracha. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, the Neshama will have an Aliyah, and the family in Nechama. Well, so with that, let us begin. Today's Daf, a lot of great Gemara to do today. All right, well, I apologize for the delay. But in Meretz Hashem, we'll get through whatever we can in Meretz Hashem. Today's daf is Samech Beis 62, and we are picking up. We left off at the two dots, right in the bottom of Samech Beis 61b. We left off 3 lines up from the bottom. Also, a very special thank you to Pariser's Bakery and Mati Margalit for accommodating the last-minute request. The sufganiyot flow like wine over there. Baruch Hashem, flow like water. Baruch Hashem. So Mati was able to accommodate a very last-minute request. All right, with that, let us begin. Ad shiyavar hakayitz at shepula mekutzos. So if you remember again, so the Mishnah was speaking about the idea as follows: a person makes a neder. I'm not going to drink wine. I'm not going to drink wine ad hakayitz. So we'll say, which means until the end of until the fig harvest. So the Gemara says, how long? What does that mean? Adakayitz. So adakayitz means up until the beginning of the kayitz. If a person says, however, achiyavar akayitz, I'm not going to drink wine until after the fig harvest. So when is the fig harvest officially over? It's over when people put away their knives. Apparently, the way that they would go ahead and harvest knives was to go ahead and, harvest figs was with a knife. So when they would put away the knife, ultimately, again, that was the end of the fig harvest. Says the Gemara, Tana, so this is very interesting. The Gemara says, now what does it mean they put away the knives? It means the majority of knives. In other words, remember again, people, obviously, not everybody is on the same exact harvesting schedule. So the idea over here is, when the majority of fig harvesters have put away their knives, that is the end of the fig harvest season. Top of Samech Beis 62a. Tana, hukbulu rov hamikutzos mutaros mishum gezel upturos min ha'maisros. So similarly, again, the Gemara says, once the majority of the knives are put away, ultimately, again, the remaining figs in the field are considered to be hefker. So because they're hefker, therefore, again, if someone comes along and takes the figs, there's no theft. So you're saying normally, again, if you walk into someone's field, you walk into someone's property and you take their stuff, that's called theft. We have to be reminded of this because we live in Baltimore, so sometimes we forget, right, that there's such a concept like this. If something on someone else's property, you're not allowed to take it, right? Okay, maybe we should rent a billboard. In any event, so the idea over here is the Gemara says, if there are figs in someone's field, halacha l'maisa, you're not allowed to go and take them. However, once the harvest season is over, anything left in the field, by definition, becomes hefker. So when does it become hefker? Once the majority of knives have been put away, then halacha l'maisa again, anything that's left in the field, there's no longer an issue of gas, no longer an issue of i.e. it's hefker. And because it's hefker, it's also pater from meiser. Incredible. So Rabbi Yossi bar Rabbi Yehuda iklolahu asra. So this is an interesting case, an interesting story. Rabbi and Rabbi Yossi bar Rabbi Yehuda went to a particular place. Now, I will say they arrived in this place bizman shehukbalu rov hamikutzos, at a time that the majority of knives had already been put away. In other words, so they were coming at the end of the fig harvest season. Rabbi havaka'achel. Rabbi, therefore, they will say now again, inevitably at the end of the fig season, the harvest season, there are figs left in the field. So Rabbi was eating whatever leftover figs there were in the field. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda lo achel. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda wouldn't eat. Asa Marhon, the owner of the field, came out and he said, Amar lahu, amaylo achli rabbanon. He said, why don't the rabbis eat? So Rabbi say, it must be, the Ram points out, it must be that at that moment, neither of them were eating. So the owner comes out, it's, listen, everything here is hefker. So please, help yourself. So the Gemara after is, Amai lo achli rabbanon, hukbulu rav hamekutzos. The majority of the knives have already been put away, and therefore, again, whatever is left in the field is hefker. You should feel free to help yourself. They both say, nevertheless, still, even after this, now remember, Rabbi was already eating, but even after the owner came out, Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda would not eat of the figs. Rabbi say, this is incredible. Why not? This is so fascinating. Kasavar mishum sanyos milso hu ka'amar hadein gavra. Now I will say, what does that mean? If you look at the Ran, the last wide line on the top of the Ran, mishum sanyos milso hu ka'amar hadein gavra, mipnei roa leiv lomar kivar tartem osas mechem. So I will say, you know what's amazing? So apparently being passive-aggressive is not a new thing. Right? So I see who thought the guy was being like a shtick. Well, I guess this isn't passive-aggressive. Maybe this is active-aggressive. He thought the guy was being cynical and sarcastic. Oh, why don't you help yourself to some more figs? So it's interesting. Rabbi Yehuda felt that the owner was upset, was disdainful of the rabbis that they are partaking of the figs in the field without, in other words, I will say, sometimes someone could go at, in other words, they were right. Halachically, they were correct. The figs at this point in time are hefker, right? Anything left in the field, one is permitted to go ahead and take. But again, Rabbi Yossi felt that the owner, when he said what he said, he didn't have to say anything. But the fact that he said something indicated a certain amount, whether it was sarcasm, cynicism, some reason of being upset. Therefore, Rabbi Yossi did not feel that it was a good idea to go ahead and eat it. Incredible. I will say, by the way, this happens to be, there's a concept in halacha of soni matanos yichya. We've learned this before, that literally, again, as Shlomo Melech says, one who despises gifts will live a long time. And I will say, so it's interesting, because it's hard to understand, because the truth is, getting a gift is a beautiful thing. Shlomo said, we're not supposed to accept gifts. Getting a gift is such a, we're supposed to say, immaterial of what the gift is. Right, Lamaisa, someone else is thinking about you, right? Someone else took the time to. It's such a beautiful thing, such a beautiful thing. So I'll say, what's part of the pshat ultimately again in Soni Matanos Yichya is sometimes when people give things, they don't really want to give. They don't really want to give. They feel compelled to give. They feel pressure to give, and so sometimes the gift itself actually has a negative effect. That's what's happening in the story over here. These Rabbanim were absolutely in the right to go ahead and partake of these figs. That's the halacha. Once the harvest season is over, majority of knives are put away. Whether the owner likes it or not, at the end of the day, they are hefker. What I was really sensed was a certain sense of reluctance, whatever it was, and to take something from someone, even though you're entitled to it, when they're reluctant, is an awkward thing. That's part of what Shlomo Melech was saying also. Soni matanos yichya. Sometimes you have to be careful, because people give stuff, but they're not really giving, or they're not really giving willingly. And that negativity that's engendered it's not only a positive resource for the relationship, but often it's something negative. Shlomo Melech says sometimes there's something to be said for not taking the gift in order to avoid potential animosity. It's an incredible idea. Rabbi Chanina, Eklaluhu Asra, Bizman Shuk Bulu Rava Mekuzos. So Rabbi Chanina went to a particular city at a time when the majority of knives had been put away, i.e., the fig harvest season was over, anything left in the field was going to be hefker. So what happened? So the Gemara says, Havaka Achil. So as a result, Rabbi Chama was eating figs. Okay? Yav L'Shamei Lo he gave to his attendant, but the attendant wouldn't eat. Amar le achol, kach amar Rabbi Shmuel Silber mishum aviv, hokpulu rava mekutzos, mutorim mushum gezel, upeturos min hamaiser. So, interesting, Rabbi Chama said to his attendant, eat because it's mutter. Eat because it's mutter. Because we learned that Allah Chalamaysa, once the majority of the knives are put away, then anything remaining in the field essentially becomes hefker and is permitted for consumption. We'll say it's interesting. That's the end of that story. Now we'll say, what's the point of that story? We'll say, see, why didn't the attendant eat? Why didn't he eat? The Pashas, why didn't he eat? He thought it was gezel. See, we learned about this in the Ramchal, which is that sometimes when a person doesn't have knowledge, you conduct yourself with false piety. Right? In other words, piety, becoming a chassid, that's actually our next step in Mesilas Yesharim. Becoming a chassid, a pious person, requires Judaic knowledge. Otherwise, you pave the path to piety with ignorance, and you end up doing a whole host of things that you don't have to do. So the Rachel already spoke about this, right? The immersing yourself in the ice and the things like this, right? So it's interesting. So the Shamus thinks he's being a pious guy, he's not eating the figs. Rabbi Chama says, you could eat it, it's mutter. It's mutter. You just didn't learn the halacha. Shabbos say it's so incredible. You want to be a chassid? You want to be a chassid? You want to be pious? Piety, holiness, by definition, requires a working knowledge of Yiddishkeit, so that you know what you are allowed to do and what you're not allowed to do. Incredible. Rabbi Tarfon, Rabbi Tarfon found the guy, this was after the fig harvest season. So he found the guy after the majority of Nedarim had been put away. I'm sorry, said it wrong. Rabbi Tarfon was in the field. Rabbi Tarfon himself was the one eating the figs. When was he eating the figs? This was after the majority of the knives had been put away. It was a wild story, right? So Rabbi Tarfon was sitting in the field or standing in the field eating figs, which is totally permitted. The majority of the knives, again, had been put away. We'll say what happened. This is incredible. The guy got upset. The owner of the field got upset. Achse bisaka. He threw Rabbi Tarfon into a sack. V'shakle v'amti l'mashe benara. And he was going to throw the sack in a river. So I said, Rabbi Tarfon. Literally, again, he got sacked, right? He literally got put in a sack. Right? Because at the end of the day, again, he was eating figs from this guy's field. So as he's being carried in the sack, Amar lo oy lo letarfon shezeh hargo. So he says out loud to himself, woe to me, woe to Tarfon, that he's going to get killed like this. Shamahu gavra. So the guy heard this, the sacker, right? The sacker heard this, and he's like, oh my gosh, I've got Rabbi Tarfon in my sack. And I will say, now how exactly do you handle that, right? When you found out that the guy you just sacked is one of the Gedolei Hadar, right? I got Rabbi Chaim Kanievsky in my sack, right? I got Rabbi Yashav in my sack, right? I have Rabbi Tarfon in my sack. So the Gemara says, so what did he do? Shafke va'arak. This is a good move, right? He put down the sack and he ran away. That's probably the only play over here, right? So the guy, the sacker, put down the sack and he ran away. So that's not the end of the story. So what's interesting is all the days of Rabbi Tarfon, first wide line, Rabbi Tarfon was always very upset about this story. Now, what was he upset about? Not about getting sacked. Rather, oili shenishtamash be kisor shel Torah. He was upset because he felt that he used literally the crown of Torah for his own benefit. In other words, I will say, how did he get himself out of this mess? By essentially using the Talmud Chacham card. So what happened over here is he used the glory of Torah to save himself from a predicament. He was upset. He was upset from himself because Rabbi said, we're going to get into this sugya. Using Torah or using the cover of Torah for one's own personal benefit is considered to be a degradation of Torah. So Rabbi Tarfon felt that this was a misuse of Torah. Incredible. Amar Oili Shishtamash Bekisot Torah. Amar Rabba Barachan. Amar Yochanan. Kol Mishtamish Bekisot Shal Torah. Whoever uses, Rabbi say literally again the crown of Torah, which means whoever uses Torah as a way, ultimately, again, for their own personal advancement. I use Torah as a way of going ahead of my own personal advancement. Ne'ekar min ha'olam. They are uprooted from the world. Now, I will say, where do we see this? From Kavachomer, from Kavachomer. Ma Belshazzar. And I will say, who was Belshazzar? Remember again, we did this Gemara Maseches Megillah. Belshazzar was the grandson of Nebuchadnezzar. Right? Nebuchadnezzar destroyed the first Beis HaMikdash. Belshazzar, his grandson, threw a big party when he thought that the 70 years had elapsed. Right? Just remember again, they had a Masorah. Navi said that Galus Bava was going to last 70 years. Belshazzar had a whole calculation. He thought the 70 years were over, and he threw a big party when he thought the 70 years were. Not only did he throw a big party, but what did he use at the party? The utensils of the Beis HaMikdash. Suma Belshazzar shenishtamish b'kli kodesh shenasu klei chol shenamar ubo ba pritzim v'chilaluha kevan shepirtzum naasechol ne'akar min ha'olam dichsev ba ba'leilei katel Belshazzar So we'll say, now listen to this. Belshazzar used the utensils of the Beis Hamikdash for his own self-aggrandizement, and he was punished with death. Now, I will say, the chap with the utensils of the Beis Hamikdash, once you use the utensils of the Beis Hamikdash outside of the Mikdash in a profane way, they lose their kedusha, they lose their holiness. So it turns out that Belshazzar didn't use Beis Hamikdash utensils for his own party. Rather, what did he use? The consecrated utensils. Yet, what was his end? His end was death. So therefore, the Gemara says, a person who goes ahead and uses Torah for his own self-aggrandizement, for his own advancement, ultimately, again, Kal v'chomer will receive a punishment. So Rabbi say, so this is what Rabbi Tarfon was upset about. And Rabbi say, by the way, it's an incredible yisod about if a person is a Talmid Chacham, person has to be careful about not utilizing or leveraging that identity for their own personal advancement. So, because again, we'll say, if you think about it, what am I doing? Person is a Talmid Chacham, that covet is not theirs. That covet belongs to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That covet is Torah. So if now I take that covet and I use it for me, for my own personal advancement, then I'm taking something that belongs to God and using it for me. It's essentially Me'ilah. It's Me'ilah. So Rabbi Tarfon was upset because Rabbi Tarfon felt that the way he saved his life was by ultimately, again, using Kavod Torah. Rabbi Tarfon gave him the Chi'achel, took blood of Mekutzal Hava, Amait Sarehu Gavra. So the Gemara just pause over here. By the way, why did he sack Rabbi Tarfon? At the end, I remember again, we'll say, when was Rabbi Tarfon eating figs? When was he eating figs? At the end of the season, right? The majority of the nights had already been put away. If the majority of the nights had been put away, then at the end of the day, why did the field owner get so angry at Rabbi Tarfon? So I said, listen to this. Dahu, Mishan Dahu, Havugan Bile Anvi Kuli Shasa, the Chav Nashki Rabbi Tarfon, Savar Hainu Diganvan. I'll say, what a profound idea. This guy, this field owner, had someone who was stealing grapes from him the entire season. And he couldn't catch the thief. One day when he comes out and he sees Rabbi Tarfon eating figs, he assumed that the same guy picking figs from his field was the same guy who was what? Who ultimately, again, was also stealing grapes the entire grape season. That's why he sacked him. I will say, by the way, isn't that absolutely incredible? What a musar. How many times do we do this in life? That based on circumstantial evidence, we pass judgment on people, right? I see something, it looks a certain way, and immediately I pounce to my conclusions, right? We'll say, we look at this story and we say, this guy is a nut. That's what you do. You sack a guy in your field because you see him eating figs at the time that it's permitted to eat figs. So Gemara says, no. He wasn't upset about the figs. But he assumed that the same guy who was going ahead and eating the figs at a time that it was permitted to eat the figs was the same guy who was stealing grapes from the field this entire time. Why do you make that assumption? Because I will say, that's what we do. We make assumptions. We see things in our mind, we do the math. You're the guy in the field, you're eating the figs, you must have eaten the grapes. And I will say, it happens all the time. I will say, we make assumptions about how people feel about us, right? I know you're angry at me. How do you know I'm angry at you? Did I tell you I'm angry at you? Right? We make assumptions about how people feel. We make assumptions about what people did. We make all of the assumptions. Like in my mind, I have it all summed up about everything you're thinking, everything you're doing, and why you're doing it. There's only one little thing that's missing, which is a conversation between me and you to actually corroborate any of those facts to see if what I think is true. And you know what the incredible thing is? When you have a conversation, you know what ends up happening? I would say probably 85% of the time, all of your assumptions are absolutely wrong. Absolutely wrong. But how much discord and how much sinah and how much animosity is caused because we see things, we create truths and realities, we never bother to corroborate them, and we conduct ourselves based on these contrived truths that we have come up with. So much animosity, so much sinah, so many broken relationships, so much negativity, and so many terrible behaviors come about as a result of people making assumptions instead of trying to corroborate what is actually happening with straight out dialogue. Incredible. Iachi, Amaitzer Navshe. So we'll say, so why? So the Gemara says, Rabbi Tarfon, why are you being so hard on yourself? Right at the end of the day, like, he's all upset that he said Ayla Tarfon. Right? He did some name dropping. That's what happened. He did some name dropping. Right? By the way, woe to Tarfon that he's stuck in his sack over here. Rabbi Tarfon, what are you all upset about? In other words, you were saving your life. Right? The guy was. Remember again, just to point out, why was the landowner throwing the sack in the river? What was the intention? To drown him. I was supposed to say, this guy was angry. This wasn't like just like to get him wet. This was a drowning, or at least a potential drowning. So Rabbi Tarfon, what are you all upset about? You saved your life. To which the Gemara says, Rabbi Tarfon, Asher Gadol Hava, V'Hava Lefai Sobedamim. So we'll say, interesting enough, what does the Gemara say? Rabbi Tarfon was very wealthy. So because he was wealthy, Rabbi Tarfon could have done is he could have yelled out from the sack, what? I'll pay you money. I'll pay you whatever you want, just don't kill me. He could have done that instead of doing the Tarfon name dropping, and that way his life would have been saved. But at the same time, he would not have had to use the crown of Torah. Interesting. Tanya. So we'll say this is so beautiful. What does it mean to love Hashem? To love Hashem, your God. L'shmoa bekolo, to listen to His voice. U'ladavka bo, and to cling to Him. What does that mean? Shelo yomar adam ekra shikruuni chacham. Eshna shikruuni Rebbe. Eshnon she'eye zokin ve'ishe b'yeshiva. A person shouldn't learn in order to be called a Talmid Chacham. He shouldn't learn in order to be called a Rav. He shouldn't learn in order that he should have a seat of prominence in the yeshiva. Rather, why should a person, Rabbi says so beautiful, Ela lamad me'ava. Rather, Rabbi say, learn out of love. Why does a person learn Torah? Rabbi say, it's so easy. We know this. Like, it's so easy for Torah to become a vehicle to be used for my own kavod. So therefore the Torah tells us, don't learn for kavod. Learn for love. Why do I learn Torah? Because I love the Ribono Shel Olam. And I know that with every single word I learn, I come closer to Him. That's it. And I will say, by the way, I want to point out also, when you learn with that mindset, it's also easier to stay in it, even when you don't necessarily understand everything. So I will say, if Torah is about my kavod, then what? If I don't understand it, then what? What's the point? But if I recognize that Torah, every single word of Torah brings me closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, creates a bond, creates a sense of love. Whether you understand it, you don't understand it, it doesn't make a difference. Then suddenly again, I'm all in. I'm all in all the time. Whether I do or I don't understand it, retain it, to a certain degree, it doesn't. That's not why I'm in this. I'm in this for love. It's so beautiful. The Gemara says, "Ela lamad me'ava," learn for love. V'sof hakavod lava. And I will say, the honor will come. I will say, what does that mean? The honor will come. What does that mean? So I will say, what it means is that at the end of the day, those who go ahead and live a life that is steeped in Torah, the learning of Torah, the observance of Torah, somehow things work out, right? You'll get the kavod you deserve, just like, again, you'll get the other brachos that you deserve. Shene'emar, kashrem al etzbosecha, kisveim al luchos libecha. I will say, such a beautiful pasuk. Such a beautiful pasuk from Mishlei. Literally, again, kashrem al etzbosecha, literally tie the Torah on your fingers, write them on the walls of your heart. I will say, if you take a look at the Ran on the left-hand side, almost right across in the Ran, Kasha Asvasecha Kilomar, Lo Techavi Lana Ascha, Elishit Kidei Shete Shigurim Beficha. Shabbos says it's actually quite beautiful. The idea of tying something on your fingers means it's a part of you. Writing it on the walls of your heart, it's part of you. Let Torah become something that's part of it. And I will say, this is another dimension. Torah is not a subject. Torah is not a discipline. Torah is not a body of knowledge like every other. There are many beautiful and important bodies of knowledge that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has given to mankind. And again, we should absolutely find a way to pursue many of them. But Torah is not a body of knowledge. Torah is something, the goal is that it becomes part of who and what you are. Tie it around your fingers. Write it on the walls of your heart. Learn Torah out of a sense of love, because recognize that every single thing you do, every single word you learn brings you closer to Hashem. So beautiful. The Gemara says, "V'sova kavod lavo," and the kavod will come. The kavod will come. Shene emar Kashim atzvasech chesam luchos libecha va'omer deracheha darchei noam va'omer eitz chayim hi lemachazikim ba v'somcheha meushar. Because we'll say the pasuk says literally it's a tree of life to those who cling on to it. V'somcheha, those who support it, will become enriched. Which I will say means, again, people are people, and people, we all like kavod, right? We all like kavod. We all like to know that, again, there's going to be bracha. So you know what the Gemara tells us here? We'll say, here's what's fascinating. If you notice, the Gemara doesn't say, just learn Torah and don't worry about kavod, don't worry about bracha, because I'll say for most of us, that would be a little bit difficult to swallow. Instead, what does the Gemara tell us? Learn Torah out of a sense of love. And just know, when you do what you're supposed to do, the life works out. Life works out. How it works out, when it works out, does it work out the way you wanted it to? Those are all variables. But Lamais, just know that if you go and you hold on to Torah, you'll have Chaim. You'll have Chaim. What's Chaim? So Chaim is covered. Chaim is Osher. You do what's on you. You learn Torah out of a sense and a purpose and a commitment to love to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and ultimately, again, the world will work out for you. It's so beautiful. Rabbi Elazar Bar Tzadok Omer asid from the Shem Palam v'daber bahem lishmam. So this is actually quite a beautiful statement. Ultimately, again, so asid from the Shem Palam means do things for the sake of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. What you do in your Yiddishkeit, don't do it for a sense of reward. Don't do for kavod. Rather, do for the sake of service to Hashem. And what? V'daber bahem lishmam. And ultimately, when you speak them, or when you perform them, do it lishma. Al tasem atar lis gadol bahem. Don't make Torah into a crown for your own self-aggrandizement. V'al tasem kordum lios oderbo. And don't use it as an axe or as a shovel to plow, or as a hoe to plow. We'll say the idea being over here, what? The idea being that don't go ahead and utilize Torah for your own purposes, for your own advancement. So the Gemara gives a kavachomer. Kavachomer, mabel shatzar, shalon ishtamish ella bechlei kodesh shenase klechol, ne'akam en ha'olam, hamishtamish bekiso shel Torah, lachas kama v'kama. We'll say the kavachomer that keeps happening is from Belshazzar. Belshazzar used deconsecrated utensils of the Beis HaMikdash, but he used them for the purpose of his own self-aggrandizement, right? And look at the end that he met. Kavachomer, a person who uses Torah, which is never deconsecrated. A person who uses Torah, which is the property of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, for his own self-aggrandizement. Chas v'shalom, again, what could happen to such an individual? Amarava. Shari le'inish was very interesting. Shari le'inish la'oduye nafshe ba'asrei delo havayadele. So it was very interesting. However, a person can make his identity known as a Talmud Chacham in a place, ultimately, again, where no one knows him. In a place where no one knows him. Now, we'll say, if we take a look at the Rush, so we'll say, what does this mean? Talmud Chacham goes to a city, no one knows that he's a Talmud Chacham. He's permitted to reveal his identity as a Talmud Chacham. Now, why is this? If you look at the Rush on the right-hand column, 2 lines up from the bottom, the Rush says, Kedesh lo yizalzalu b'kavod Torah v'yanshu. But this is very interesting. There is a terrible punishment that is given to those who disparage Talmidei Chachamim. So there's a concern that if a person goes to a place and they don't know that he's a Talmid Chacham, I want to say in general, one shouldn't disparage anyone, right? But the idea is there's a special punishment that devolves upon those who disparage Talmidei Chachamim. So therefore the Gemara says like this: if a person goes to a place where no one knows him, he's permitted to divulge his identity as a Talmid Chacham. Why? Because it's for the benefit of the townspeople. Because this way, again, they'll be extra careful with his kavod and not chas v'shalom come to any level of disparagement. So I both say, so in this case over here, the revelation of the Talmid Chacham identity is not for the Talmid Chacham. Who is it for? It's for the other people in the town. Incredible. So the Gemara goes weiter. So we'll say this is by Ovadia, by the Navi Ovadia. He revealed his identity to Eliyahu. That Eliyahu, because Eliyahu didn't necessarily know that Ovadia was in fact the Talmid Chacham, or was in fact a pious individual. He revealed his identity. Ella Kashya to Rabbi Tarfon. So we'll say, so 1 second. So once again, everything comes back to Rabbi Tarfon. You're allowed to reveal your identity. In other words, I will say, Rabbi Tarfon was sacked. Right, the guy who sacked him didn't know that it was Rabbi Tarfon. So it's in Rabbi Tarfon's best interest to reveal, hey, it's Tarfon in here. Why? so that the guy, again, shouldn't incur any additional punishment for his mistreating. So Rabbi Tarfon, why are you all upset that you revealed your identity? Once again, the Asher Gadol Haya, Favle Lefai Sebedamim. Because also, again, Rabbi Tarfon felt there was another way. He could have paid him off. He was very wealthy, could have paid him off, and paying him off would have had the same desired effect. He would have gotten out of the sack, quite literally gotten out of the sack, and ultimately would not have had to use the crown of Torah. Rava, Ramiksiv, Rava contrasts two psukim. One it says, Va'avdecha, Yares Hashem inu Arav. So we'll say this is the Navi of Vadya, revealing his identity as a pious individual to Elio. So you see over here that you're allowed to reveal your pious identity to someone else. Uksiv, Ya'alel Chazar Velopicha. Yet the pasuk says, let someone else praise you, but don't let your own mouth praise you. Okay, so how do you reconcile it? So we'll say, so again, in a place where people know you, don't sing your own praises. Because if you do so, it is only a display of gaiva. Place where people know you, they know you. You don't have to talk about yourself if they know you. In a place where people don't know you, then again, there may be a need to divulge your Talmud Chacham identity, again, for the benefit of the townspeople, so that they don't, chas v'shalom, disparage you in any way. Incredible. Amar Rava, a Talmud Chacham is permitted to say, I'm a Talmud Chacham. Sharli Tigra Reisha. Adjudicate my case, right? Adjudicate my case first, right? In other words, that Rabbi says, so in other words, if a Talmud Chacham comes to Beis Din, so remember again, Beis Din will adjudicate the case of a Talmud Chacham before a regular person. So if a person comes to Beis Din and there's a line, he's allowed to say, I'm a Talmud Chacham, please adjudicate my case first. I will say, why is he allowed to do that? Because the assumption is that a Talmud Chacham, if he's waiting online, that's bittul Torah. He's losing out on the opportunity to learn. So in order to go ahead and facilitate or diminish his bittul Torah, he's allowed to divulge his Talmud Chacham identity. D'chsev ubeneko David kohanim hayu. So let's listen to this. The pasuk says, the sons of David were kohanim. Now we'll say, the sons of David were not kohanim. Right? David is from Shevet Yehuda. So what does it mean that the sons of David were Talmidei Chachamim? So what we're going to learn from the pasuk is like this, that a Talmud Chacham is treated like a Kohen. How so? How so? Mak Kohen nota barosh, av Talmud Chacham nota barosh. Just like a Kohen goes first, or literally takes first, so to a Talmud Chacham takes first. So this is fascinating. So it's this pasuk that creates a certain level, that equates a Talmud Chacham with a Kohen. Just like a Kohen goes first, so Talmud Chacham goes first. Says the Gemara, the Kohen minalan. How do you know that the Kohen goes first? Going out, I don't even know what going first means, but I know that a Kohen is first. Because the pasuk says, you shall sanctify him. This is the Kohen, because he offers up the bread of God, meaning that because the Kohen offers up karbanos, therefore he is given preferential treatment. What kind of preferential treatment? The Tana de Rabbi Shmuel, the Kidashto, l'chol davar shebekdusha. What does it mean, the Kidashto? In every matter of holiness, l'chol davar shebekdusha, Kohen should go first. How so? Amud Beis, liftoach rishon, ulevarech rishon. So we'll say, this is actually interesting. There's a little bit of machlokes over here. The Rosh says, the Rosh is in the left-hand column. Liftoach rishon, the Rosh says, lios rosh havendarim mechol kibbutz, am ledaber v'lejosh tchila. They will say, whenever you have a national gathering, or any type of gathering, a Kohen is always given the right to speak first. That's how the Rosh understands liftoach rishon. The Ran understands it that no, liftoach rishon means he's given the first aliyah. He's given the first aliyah. Okay, so liftoach rishon, levarech rishon. So interesting. So again, according to the Rosh, levarech rishon means, get the first bracha means the first aliyah. According to the Ran, levarech rishon means he's given precedence to lead benching. Velitol mana yafa rishon. Kohen also gets, I will say again, when you're passing around the tray of food, the Kohen gets to pick first so that he gets the nicest portion. That's a Kohen. So I will say, so what do you see from here? You see from here that a Kohen is given precedence. A Kohen is given covet. So therefore the Gemara says that because a Kohen is given precedence, therefore Allah Lamaisa, a Kohen, a Talmud Chacham is compared to a Kohen, and therefore just like the Kohen goes first, therefore ultimately again the Talmud Chacham goes first as well. Incredible. So the Gemara says, Amar Rava, Sharli l'tzar mirabanan l'meimar lo yahivna akarga. Hus is great. A Talmud Chacham is permitted to say, I'm not going to pay the head tax. It's a good one, right? I'm not paying the head tax. I will say, now, what's the pshat with this? What's the pshat? Right, parsonage, right? Shaul says, now listen to this. This was even more than, this was an exemption. This is an exemption. Now watch this. The Gemara says, quoting over here the pasuk from Ezra, and the pasuk says, "Minda below v'haloch lo shalit lemir ma'aleh." Now, I will say what this is saying over here is that a Talmid Chacham is permitted to identify as a Talmid Chacham in order to claim an exemption from taxes. Now, I will say this notion of Talmid Chacham being exempted from taxes. So the Gemara is quoting this pasuk from Ezra. What does this mean? Minda below v'haloch lo shalit lemir ma'aleh. Amar Yehuda, Minda zuminas hamelech. So we'll say these were different types of taxes. So Minda, the Rush says, Minas HaMelech was property tax. Property tax. Below, Zukesef Gulgalta, that's a head tax. V'halach Zu Arnona. So we'll say, the Rush says that Arnona ultimately, again, is Isur Behemos, is a tax on livestock. The Ran, on the other hand, says Arnona is that whenever the king was traveling, the townspeople were always obligated to supply the king with necessary food. The point over here is that v'halach zu arnona. So I just want to point out, already in the times of Ezra, they instituted that clergy was exempt from all of these types of taxes. So therefore, Rabbi say it's a known thing that Talmid Chacham are exempt from taxes. Therefore, the Gemara is saying over here is a person is permitted to identify. I don't know how you get that designation as a tzara mirabanan, but you're permitted to go ahead and say I'm a tzara mirabanan, therefore exempt from taxes, and that's not considered to be a usage of Torah for your own purposes. Why? Because since it's an institutionalized exemption, it's not considered to be mishtamish bekisra shel Torah. You're not considered to be using Torah for your personal. Well, you hear the chilik. In other words, when I'm trying to use Torah for a benefit that's unique, that's when it's called ultimately utilizing the crown of Torah. But the Gemara is suggesting over here, if something is an institutionalized exemption, then kind of flashing your clergy card, saying I'm a tzura mirabanan, is not considered to be getting benefits from Torah. Incredible. So the Gemara says as follows. Vamarava, avda denura ana. Lo yahev nakaga. Both said this is incredible. A Talmid Chacham is permitted to say, this is wild, I am avda denura, I worship the fire god, and therefore I don't have to pay taxes. I don't have to pay the head tax. And I both say, now this is pretty wild, right? Remember again, the fire god is Avodah Zarah. So it sounds like you're allowed to say that I worship Avodah Zarah in order to get out of taxes, right? I'm allowed to, even a Talmid Chacham is permitted to say I worship the fire god to get out of taxes. So we'll say, look at the Ran. The Ran says over here, Avda denura ana, eved lishu koin la'ovde aish, sha'avdu p'ter mikarga, v'lo havi kemode ba'avodas kochavim. So we'll say, this is not considered to be like what? Like going ahead and admitting to idolatry. The muchacha milsa the only reason he's saying it is because he wants to get out of the taxes. Let's just talk about this just for a second. What does this mean? So let's talk about the logic and then let's talk about the application. What the Gemara is saying is like this. Essentially, it was known that the fire worshippers were exempt from taxes. And therefore, again, even a Talmid Chacham could say, I am a fire worshipper and therefore exempt from taxes. Why? Isn't that like admitting to idolatry? No. Why? Because since he says at the end, I'm a fire worshiper. Why? To be exempt from taxes, it's clear that what's his motivation in saying that he's a fire worshiper? To get exempt from taxes. Not because he's being molded to Avodah Zarah. Now I will say, just to understand something here, this must be talking about a situation of despotic taxation, right? Because in general, you have to pay taxes. Right? And in general, again, if something is a legitimate law, you have to go ahead and abide by it. That's called Dina D'Malchusa Dina. But Dina D'Malchusa Dina only applies to concepts that are rooted in a legitimate legal system. But when there was, not despotic taxation, there's a better word for it, I guess excessive taxation, right? Illegitimate taxation. So again, in that type of situation, one is permitted to employ certain loopholes because, again, it doesn't apply to Dina D'Malchusa Dina. That's why I will say, again, Dina D'Malchusa Dina applies to a legitimate legal system, not to a despotic legal system. So the Gemara is talking about over here a situation where the taxes in question were just inappropriate taxes. So therefore, again, what the Chiddush of the Gemara is saying over here is that you're allowed to go ahead and even make mention. I'm a fire worshiper to be, now again, you can't just say I'm a fire worshiper. The phrase is what? I am a fire worshiper and therefore exempt from taxes. Because like that, the statement itself shows that the only reason that you're bringing up fire worship is why? To exempt yourself from the tax. So in that case, it doesn't look like one Chas V'Shalom is being moda, is admitting to Avodah Zarah. Let's finish up. So the Gemara says, my time, what's the reason? Lavruchi arya minei kamar. Literally, again, you're chasing a lion away from your property. So we'll say that's the lashon. Chasing a lion away from my property means there's a lion, there's something trying to devour that which is mine inappropriately, so I'm permitted to go ahead and chase the lion away. Rav Ashi havalehahu abba, zabni beinura. Rav Ashi had an abba, and he sold it to Beinura. That doesn't mean he sold his father to Beinura. Well, say Abba, Rashi says, the Ran says over here, Rashi says it also, is a ya'ar, is a forest. So this is very interesting on both sides. Listen to this. So Rav Ashi had a forest. He sold his forest to the sect of fire worshippers. Fire worshippers. Amr Ravina says, Rav Ashi, how can you do that? Amr Ravina Rav Ashi, how can you do that? How can you do that? After all, again, the Pashtos, if the fire worshippers buy a forest, what are they going to be using the forest for? What are they using the forest for? Worshipping their God, right? Building fires, which is Avodah Zarah. Shabbos say, isn't that placing a stumbling block in front of a blind person? Shabbos say, if you know someone's going to go ahead and commit a particular Aveira, and you enable that Aveira, you're culpable. You're culpable for that. So Ravina says to Rav Ashi, how can you sell a forest to the fire worshippers, knowing full well that chances are they're going to cut down that, use it to worship their deity? To which the Gemara says, Amalei, Rov Eitzim lahasaka nit. I will say it's very interesting. The majority of wood is used for burning, not for avodah zarah. Hasaka, I will say, means burning. Burning can mean heat. Burning can mean food. Burning can mean a whole variety of usages, but lav dafka avodah zarah. If you look at the Ran says over here, Rov Eitzim lahasaka nitnu ve'eno kimocher lavod avodas kochavim da'ika lemitli be'atera v'chol hecha da'ika lemitli talinon. I will say the idea over here is even fire worshippers don't use the majority of wood for avodah zarah. What do fire worshippers use the majority of wood in their lives for? Heating, cooking, activities of daily living for which you need fire. So therefore, I will say it's very interesting. So therefore, halacha l'maisa, Rav Ashi felt there's no problem to sell to him because I don't have to make the assumption that halacha l'maisa, they're using it for avodah zarah. So I will say, we'll stop over today. A lot in this daf. But again, I will say this notion of being mishtamish bekisur shel Torah, this notion again of, it's so beautiful because what it teaches us is how we're supposed to relate to Torah. Torah, on one hand, is this interesting thing. On one hand, it belongs to us. But yet the beauty of it is the Ribono Shel Olam never fully relinquishes his hold on it. Isn't that incredible? I'll say it's almost as if, Chazal tell us that when Moshe Rabbeinu received the luchos from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Gemara in Sukkah says there was a moment where the Ribono Shel Olam was holding on to the top of the luchos, and Moshe Rabbeinu was holding on to the bottom of the luchos. That metaphor is an incredible thing. And even though HaKadosh Baruch Hu let go, Moshe Rabbeinu brought it down, HaKadosh Baruch Hu never fully let go. The Moshe always holds on to a piece of the Torah. It's always his. It's ours, but it's his. And that's why, again, when I use it for mundane purposes, for self-advancement, self-aggrandizement, what I'm doing is I'm taking something that belongs to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and I'm using it for something mundane. On the flip side, I have the opportunity to use something that belongs to the Ribono Shel Olam. I will say, isn't that incredible? My Gemara, this belongs to Hashem, yet He allows me to use it every single day. All He asks is that I use it to come closer to Him. All He asks is that I use it in order to love Him a little bit more each and every day. And Mirat Hashem may be zocha to do so. Shkaya Chavra. All right, Chavra, have a great day, everyone. I'm sorry? Yeah, I'm going to have to record it. I'll record it separately. What do you like?
PC, they would say taxation without representation.
That's true.
If I make